Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Mead.
And I'm Christy.
And in this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, well, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out,
but actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Hello, my beautiful friend. It's Christy here. We are about to play for you a really incredible conversation with our new friend, Blake Roberts. I met Blake in our recovery. We have an amazing group of Christian authors who write about recovery, and we have a group that meets. And I met Blake there, and then I started following his Substack. And I love so much what he writes about and how he's helping men break free from various addictions. And listen, I know most of our listeners are women. We love talking to women. Our community is women, but it is so important to get a guy's perspective on these things. And there is such a lack of men speaking into addiction from a Christian standpoint. And so when we find someone that we think can help both us and is a resource for husbands and boyfriends and everybody like that, we get really excited to share their stories. So Blake is a licensed therapist. He's a writer and a podcast host out of Nashville, Tennessee. He's a husband and a father. He writes the weekly newsletter, More to the Story, which explores how to move from self-protection to real connection. He shares insights on healing attachment wounds, fostering healthy relationships, softening fear, and learning to trust again. And he has started the coolest podcast and ministry with his best friend, who he met in a 12-step recovery, and it's called 3%. And Blake will explain to us in this episode why it's called 3%. The 3% of us that we kind of don't share, that we hold back, we're not feeling great about being vulnerable about. And him and his business partner and his podcast co-host really dive deep into all of these places where both men, I think, and women feel like they cannot share and can't be honest and can't be vulnerable. So it's so powerful what they're doing. We're going to hear his story, his personal story about sex addiction and how that led to him becoming a therapist and helping others. We're going to talk about internal family systems and how that helps us to understand different addictions. We're going to talk about the importance of community and vulnerability. And there's just so much good stuff in this episode. We loved this conversation so much. And so we are definitely going to have Blake and Jamie, his podcast co-host of 3%, back on the podcast here really soon. But without further delay, here is our conversation with Blake Roberts. Hi, Blake.
Hello.
Welcome. Blake Roberts, our guest today. He is a professional therapist.
Yes.
Yeah, husband, father. But yeah, we're excited to get to know you through your story today. And our listeners love a good story, a freedom from whatever, fill in the blank story. Mm-hmm. And then also hear about this exciting project that you have started, that you have launched recently, because one of the most frequently asked questions I get is, where is the resource for the dudes? That you and Christy have this podcast and this community, and you're talking about these things, and you're helping women find freedom from the things that are keeping them stuck from living how they're meant to be living, keeping them disconnected from God, from themselves, from others. Where is the resource for the dudes? And when we connected through Caroline's group that we're all in, I was like, this is it. I was so pumped because you and your buddy Jamie have that resource perhaps. So we definitely want to hear about all that as well. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's great to connect with you guys, and I love what y'all are doing. So this is fun.
Where do you want to begin with your story? How did you get to be to where you're having a resource, a podcast, a community now where you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a private practice in the Nashville, Tennessee area, working mostly with men. I see some women too, but I'd say 90% of my practice is made up of men. And I never thought that I would be a therapist. My undergrad degree was in Christian ministries. I played football in college, and I went to this small Christian school, and I was on track to become a pastor. Was kind of like my thought and my my path or my goal. And I interned at a church that I'll just say it was not from my perspective at that time. Well, not from my perspective. I didn't really know it, but some outside people started helping me see that it maybe wasn't the healthiest culture. And so when I got behind the scenes of that and experienced some things, I was like, oh, this isn't what I think I wanted to be a part of, which was not a great time to realize that because I was about to graduate college and there's not much you can do in the professional world with just a Christian ministries degree if you're not planning to work in the church. Um, and so I say that to say that the desire to help people has always been a part of me. I just never thought that it would look like being a therapist because I didn't, people in my family didn't go to therapy growing up, or at least if they did, not my immediate family or um, surrounding family, like it wasn't talked about. We didn't talk about feelings really. And so I didn't go to therapy for the first time until my 20s, maybe, yeah, like early 20s. And I'll get to that story, but that was when I started dating my now wife, who grew up going to therapy. So it was very familiar to her. And it was some things came out in me and my story when we were dating that it was kind of like gently encouraged that I probably should go see somebody. And so kind of like the big, I would say, markers that led me to where I am now is like in my family system growing up, I'm the oldest of three. So I have a 9. My sister is 9 years younger than me, and my brother is 11 years younger than me. Same parents, just big age gaps. So, and there's probably a lot of like nuance that I'm going to leave out just for the sake of painting a picture. But my parents didn't really have the healthiest relationship. It turns out for like most of their marriage, and my dad ended up having a few affairs later, which ultimately led to their separation and their divorce. And so what I know now, being a therapist, is that when there is disconnection or a lack of health in the marital relationship, inevitably there's going to be some funky dynamics that happen with the kids. And in my particular story, with being the oldest by that many years, I inevitably fell into some father roles, fell into some husband roles, even just like emotionally. Not that that was like intentionally or subconsciously or consciously done by my parents or my mom, but it's just like the nature of the system. And I'm sure your listeners are familiar. I was listening to your all's episode, maybe a few episodes ago, when you had that lady from the UK that was talking about attachment. Julie, I think maybe.
Joe.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
Joe. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So like, yeah, it's just inevitable that that's going to happen. And so that created a lot of things in me that I always say that the things that I'm best at as a therapist now, listening, holding space, caring for others, also is like my deepest wounding, because it's kind of like what I had to do, or what at least what I felt like I had to do. So like my family system plays a big part in that. There's a lot of addiction in my family, like generationally, sex addiction, gambling, alcohol addiction, all sorts of things. So I had it was pretty probable that I was going to fall into some of that too. And I did. I started drinking probably for the first time, maybe like freshman year of high school, and lost my virginity when I was a freshman in high school. And so just lots of what I would say ways of like running. I heard somebody say we're always running from something and running to something. I was for sure running from a lot of things in myself, in my family, and running to a lot of other things that proved not to be what I needed, but they made me feel good. And so I kept going back. And I had, again, I'm kind of hitting the main points, but like I had a suicide attempt when I was a junior in high school, just as a result of what I would say is like not knowing how to feel. Like there was so much that was happening in me. And there was an incident that kind of led to this, but where it was even more overwhelming. But it was like everything combined. I just didn't have healthy outlets to know what I didn't know what I was feeling, and I didn't like know what to do with what I was feeling. And so it got to the point where it became so overwhelming that this just seemed like a way to relieve all of that. And still, like I drove my car into a tree, and so that there wasn't like alcohol poisoning, there wasn't cutting, there wasn't like empty pill bottles to for people to easily see like, oh, this was somebody that was intentionally trying to kill themselves. So it was very easy for me, even in that story, even with my parents, to make up the story that like I went to go get I dropped my phone in the console and I went to go pick it up and just kind of veered off the road and the ditch caught it. So even still, like in that lonely, really like desperate state, I still wasn't able to be right. I wasn't honest about what was really. And so I went to college and I was like, I gotta get away from all of this. And also, like, I've grown up in church my whole life. I think I maybe got saved when I was like 7 or 8 or something. And like, we were very involved in church and like I played drums. So I did not have that community. I was a part of that. And when I went to college, it was kind of like subconsciously, I was like, I just need to get away from everything. And yeah, I played football. So I fell into the kind of stereotypical collegiate jock stereotype of like partying and, you know, I, it was a small Christian school. So we had like stuff on campus, but I was like, that's not for me. I'm going to live my own life as if I hadn't already. Like the high school, the 4 years of high school were probably like some of the worst years, I would say. And then I had a moment, maybe my sophomore year or end of my freshman year, where I would say God did kind of like a 180, or at least I let him do a 180. I wasn't quite ready for like a full 360 change yet. And so what that looked like was I like stopped partying. I stopped drinking. I stopped hooking up with people. But then this like secret pornography addiction kind of was the thing that I held on to. That so there was some real change, but then there was also a lot of still hiding and just a lot of shame and a lot of loneliness, because it ultimately wasn't what I was wanting to do, but what I was trying wasn't working, and I kept going back to that. So fast forward, I meet my wife, my now wife. She lived in Nashville. I was in Kentucky. A friend of hers came to the school to play football with me. He introduced us, long story short. And she was like the first relationship that was different, and that I was like, this feels different and I want to be different, and I want to take this seriously. And so like pursued that relationship different than any that I had before, was honest with her about my pornography struggle. And again, long story short, that's how I ended up going to therapy. And the therapist that I met with started introducing me to like my family of origin and attachment and arts work. And this was in like 2015, maybe 2016. And it just was like a whole new world to me. Like things started making sense, and that there's connections and, all this stuff that really, it started to feel seen in a way that I hadn't before, by him, also like by myself. I wasn't like slowing down to even slowing down enough to see myself. And my wife was seeing a therapist who she was a therapist at this sex addiction treatment center in Nashville called Bethesda Workshops. And it's like Christian based. So the Bethesda, like there's some scripture symbolism in that. And it's like a 4 or 5 day intensive workshop that my therapist was like, I think you should look into this, as he was learning more about kind of what I was doing and just what I was struggling with. And then we started couples counseling like when we were dating, and which turned out to be amazing and really helpful for us. But since she worked at, her name is Barbie, and she's like this, I don't even know if she's 5 feet tall, this little like bobbed hair, like 60-year-old woman that is just like the kindest, but also like a powerhouse. And she was like, yeah, you need to go. And our pastor at the time actually helped me, and some other people helped pay for me to go to this intensive. And we were dating, and I show up to this place and I'm surrounded by, I think there's 50 guys maybe. And we have a small group while we're there of like 6 or 7 of us. And there's a therapist assigned to our group for the whole time. And I'm like there with guys they have a partners workshop, they have a female workshop, and they have a men's workshop. And I was at the men's intensive. And I'm there with guys that are like, they had just gotten in trouble legally. Maybe they hired prostitutes and got caught, or, whatever. Or guys that got caught by their wives and they didn't know if they had a marriage that they were going back to when they got out. And I'm there, and my wife, we were dating, and I have these little notes from her to open for each day that are like encouraging me. And she's so proud of me that I'm doing this. And so that was really sweet when I look back on it. And it also kind of played into this notion that like, I don't really have that big of an issue. Like, yeah. I'm not in this place that these guys are, which is really silly to think back on, like where I had been and what I had done to still be in that place of like, I don't really have an issue. I just kind of got this thing that I need to learn how to manage so I don't end up like my dad, was kind of my thought process. And so I went through that, learned a lot more about specifically sex addiction and how that is not just like a moral failure and something that you just need to pray harder to find freedom from, and learned a lot of like the neuroscience behind it and all this stuff. And one of the things they recommend afterwards is that you go to 12-step, you go to SA. And I had been, I think, to maybe one meeting before, and I was like, this is weird. And so when I got out, I didn't go, and I maybe white knuckled some sobriety for 6 or 7 months, kind of off the high of being at this intensive. And that worked until it didn't, and ended up having just some things happen that I was not proud of. And then woke up one morning and was like, okay, Nashville, for some reason, I live in Nashville, and it happens to be like the hub of SA kind of nationwide. Like there's meetings in Nashville every day of the week, 3 or 4 times a day, like all over town. So I'm like, okay, I don't really have any excuses. It's not hard to get to one. And so I just woke up and went to a 6 o'clock meeting, and I didn't know anybody, but God doing for me what I couldn't for myself got me in the room. And it was the first like formal meeting where you sit in a circle of chairs and people just like share their stuff, and everybody just listens and says thanks, and the other person goes. There was something about that experience that something in me was like, oh, this is what I need. This is what I've been avoiding. And so that just turned into a whole different layer of engaging my story. And thankfully I had gotten a sponsor who he was in his 60s, had done a lot of his own work, had done some trainings at the Allender Center, if you guys are familiar with Dan Allender. And but he was really familiar with story work and knew how to engage other people in that. And I got introduced to Dan's work. And so it just kept all these doors opening of deeper and deeper engaging my own story. And out of that, I started to, I'm in therapy for years now at this point, and I started to think I wonder if I was on the other side of the chair. And then that eventually led me going back to grad school. And so that is kind of the overview. The newer, I guess, thing that has happened is I stopped drinking a year ago.
Imagine stepping into a vibrant, warm community where faith, friendship, and freedom from alcohol all come together. That's exactly what you'll experience in the But Jesus Drank Wine community.
Each week, our members gather for connection calls that feel like a breath of fresh air, a time to share, grow, and support one another.
With an encouraging leadership team, a dedicated prayer request space, and connection opportunities in every time zone, you don't have to walk this journey alone.
Plus, we bring you masterclasses with expert guests, optional book clubs and Bible studies, and so much more.
And for those ready to go even deeper, we offer a small group coaching space called The Missing Piece. With weekly recorded coaching calls, it's a supportive place for women committed to breaking free from alcohol.
We're here to hold space for sober and sober-curious women who love Jesus or are eager to reconnect with him. Wherever you are on your path, you'll feel seen, supported, and strengthened here.
As one member described, quote, "The BJDW community is unique because there's a connection between faith and freedom from alcohol that I haven't been able to find in any other online space or through my church."
Ready to join the sisterhood? Head over to butjesusdrankwine.com/community or click the link in the show notes to learn more. We can't wait to meet you.
That's so good. I'm struck by how similar our stories can be when the details can be so different, the circumstances can be so different. And I heard you saying a lot of the things that I think I know I said, well, it's not that bad. And no, I wasn't a rock bottom drinker, but it's so easy to kind of buy into those lies that maybe oh, I don't really have to do something about this. But yet there is that, and for me, it was internal conflict tension that was telling me that the drinking is getting in the way of all the things. And so I was struck by that similarity in your story, and that what you said by we're running from and running to something. And it reminded me of how living in that autopilot place, it's so easy to end up not knowing what we're running from and we're running to. But when we have that opportunity to kind of, wake up, pay attention, and usually it starts with connecting with somebody else when we're in that disconnected place, like is your story too. Yeah, I'm struck by how relatable it is, even though it's so different. And so, yeah, I would love to hear more about some of the other stories that have played a part in keeping you stuck, whether it's with sex addiction or maybe even alcohol. Maybe that's a segue into that as well.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I have, as I was telling you before getting on this recording, I have a 20-month-old right now. We had a heck of a morning, and that's just where I am right now. But when she was born, she was maybe a few months old. My wife and I were we're going to go disconnect. There's this place called Getaway Cabins in Nashville, and they're it's this big property kind of out in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. And there's all of these little renovated kind of I'm not going to paint a good picture, kind of like trailers that are these like renovated. It's like glamping, basically. It's not camping, but you have your own little spot, and there's this really cool place you can stay in. There's like a little fire pit, and so you just stay there. And we're like, we're just gonna go get away, bring Charlotte, my daughter, and because she was still napping throughout the day a lot, and so we went, and as I would always do at places like that or trips like that, grabbed like this 6-pack of some craft beer and brought it with, and I don't remember. This was like an important detail to remember. It was either on the way there or on the way back. My wife we'd been married for, I don't know, 6-7 years at this point. And like you just said, like I wouldn't have said that I had a problem with drinking in the sense of what I had seen a problem with drinking look like. And definitely not to the type of problem it was with like pornography, where it was like compulsive. It was like a secret. Like people knew that I drank and I'd go grab a beer with friends and things like that. And I didn't keep beer in the house a lot. I wasn't one of the like bourbon guys that had a shelf stocked of bourbon, but like I'd like a good bourbon with a cigar or an occasional beer or going to a place like this. So it was, I think on the way back, maybe my wife really kindly was just inquisitive and curious about my relationship with alcohol. And I probably was defensive at first, but for some reason in that moment, my defenses were not as strong. And so we just kind of talked about it openly. And we had done a lot of work about talking about things that there can be a lot of shame around and knowing how to navigate that by this point. And what she kind of helped me realize is if it was like, why? Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
And
Was she drinking or she didn't drink?
no, I mean, she like never did anything growing up. And so I think the first drink she had maybe was on her 21st birthday. And she's just like, I don't really care for it. Like, I don't like it. She's the type of person that if we go to a wedding or a party, she just knows how to have a genuine good time. And people may look like, oh, she's like feeling herself. She's must have had a couple of drinks. And she's like, no, I can just have fun and not have to have a substance to help me do that, which I didn't. I was not like that. So she like would maybe have a glass of wine with dinner, but she would like not finish the glass because she's like, yeah, I'm done with it or whatever. And I'd be like, I'll finish it for you. So at this cabin, she wasn't. And it was just me. And what she helped me realize was I couldn't think of a time where if I had one beer, I like had to have two, or if I had to finish the can, or kind of like I just joked about, like if we were having dinner and I had a glass of wine and she had one, I would like finish hers for her, even when she didn't know. And then I'd like pour some more in her glass, like little things where I was like, I'm not getting drunk in the way that I used to in college or high school. But yeah, I just started to be really honest about why I was really doing it. And I didn't actually, I think this is something I hear a lot from guys, especially as it relates to alcohol, because it is still such like a socially acceptable addiction that people aren't going to question you on, is like, there is such a culture around like craft beer and bourbon and whiskey. And so for me, it was easy to be like, oh, I'm a creative person. I like just really enjoy the art of craft beer, and like when I was really honest with myself, it wasn't true. Like I enjoyed more the little tiny buzz I got from the craft beer that had a higher percent than the other one. Or even if I liked the taste of one than the other, I would more often than not get the one that was the higher percentage of alcohol, because I knew that. So yeah, I just was like, okay, maybe like, what is the point? Why am I doing this? And so it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to just stop drinking forever, or I'm going to like start going to AA but I committed with her. This was around Christmas time, I think, is when we first had the conversation. And I remember we had a work Christmas party, and that's just, again, just a place where you have like a fun Christmas cocktail or whatever. And I didn't drink. I chose not to drink that night. And it was like really hard because of the environment, and that would have been like a fun place to do it. And then like I just kept going, and what I mean is like I kept not drinking. And then I like realized, crazy. I realized that like I felt better.
Who knew?
Shotgun.
Who knew?
I didn't like miss it as much as I thought I would, or like I would go weeks or even months and I was like, oh, I haven't even actually thought about having a drink until I went to this restaurant and everybody grabbed a beer. And like I still have plenty of friends that have a very different relationship with alcohol than I did. And I'm not like everybody needs to not drink. I just know for me, when I was really honest about again, back to the attachment stuff, my relationship with alcohol, because we have a relationship with everything. I have an unhealthy relationship with coffee right now. I'm not to the point where I'm ready to surrender that. And some things that I have a relationship with are more damaging. And that was one of my relationship with this is not, you said something earlier about disconnected. This is not, I think that it's helping me connect more because it's like making me, I hear this a lot too from clients, like it's making me more comfortable with myself or open, or I can talk more easily at a party or a social event. I just don't really think that's true. Like it actually keeps me more disconnected from myself and the people around me because it's not like authentically me. And so even if I may open up and I'm able to talk more, it's like that part of me that is showing up is, I don't know, is that really me? And so I think that can be kind of a misconception around what it helps you do. And also, I just want to learn how to be more comfortable in my own skin without having to have something help me do that.
Yeah, that's the biggest story that kept me stuck was, and the thing I couldn't reconcile for so long and kept me not doing anything about being stuck. It was, well, I need this for connection. I need the wine for connection because we've been sold the lies of the mommy wine culture. Like you've been sold the lies of the, the bourbon culture and the craft beer culture. And I mean, it's just, I'm like, gosh, it's so sneaky. But yeah, I was like, I need this for connection with my husband, with my friends, with my family. And also if I was really quiet and really still, I could hear. And also it's the very thing that is keeping you from being meaningfully connected to anybody, yourself included, the Lord included. And so, yeah, I appreciate what you said about that. It's good.
So you mentioned earlier parts work, IFS, internal family systems, for those who don't know what it means, just a therapy modality. I'm not trained in it in the sense that like I've gone through the intense certification, but I've been a client of it since like 2017 on and off. And it's been hugely impactful for me. And I use it a lot with clients that I work with now. And for the sake of time, I'll just say if you're listening to this and you're like, what is internal family systems? Just like do a quick Google or YouTube search, because that you can find a really clear explanation of it. And also maybe even look up Dr. Allison Cook, because she is a therapist and an author who does a really good job at combining internal family systems and the Christian faith. And so for the sake of time, just go look it up and you'll know what and then come back and this will make more sense. for myself and even some clients I work with, I used to say in 12-step meetings, I'm a sexaholic. Hey, I'm Blake, I'm a sexaholic. That's kind of the thing. And everybody goes around and says their own version of that, or I'm an alcoholic. And I have a love-hate relationship with 12-step recovery even. And one of the hate parts of it, hate's a strong word, but the dislikes is like, if you don't do or say like exactly what the program and the language says you should, it's like, are you really recovering? I'm just
We've never heard
more
that
and
before.
more. And I'm like, or do different things just work for different people?
Right.
And sure, like some people can use that as ways to like keep doing what they're doing. But what I say now, and what I kind of even help clients start to think about, is like, I have a part of me that is addicted to, or at least uses or wants to use pornography in order to protect me. I have a part of me that wants to use alcohol in a way to protect me. And like, that's so different than the way I used to think about it. There used to be so much shame around it, or it's like the enemy is just out to get me. And this is like the thing that he's using. And I'm not like getting into a theological debate about it. I'm just saying, for me, one, even just thinking about it as like, this is a part of me, as opposed to saying like, I'm an alcoholic, is so much lighter. Like, my shoulders drop a little bit and I'm like, oh, okay, that actually feels a little bit more manageable than I have this death sentence of like, I'm an alcoholic for the rest of my life. And if some people that helps them, like, I'm not saying, that doesn't work. For me, it helps me go, okay, it like separates me from that part a little bit to go, okay, I have a part of me that learned somewhere along the way when I was an early teen that this thing is something that I can use to disconnect me from my reality. I'll just sum it up that way.
Yeah.
So when I think about that, like, okay, how would I don't have a teenage kid yet, but I'm like, when my daughter is a teenager and she's doing something that is trying to disconnect her from her reality, how do I want to engage her in that? Not the way that I typically engage myself whenever I am participating in a behavior that I am not proud of.
Yeah.
And so like, when I have these urges, even still today, even if I've had a long period of time of not engaging in that substance, when I have the urge, okay, there's that part of me again, that like young part of me that is wanting to disconnect or wanting to protect me from something in my reality. And that helps me just to like have more compassion, more curiosity for myself. Because whenever I'm critical of those parts of me, like, I actually don't really get. And so practicing that has helped me to not only me to think that God has compassion toward the parts of me that want to use alcohol or want to use fill in the blank. I could feel like some tears coming up, even just saying that. Like, that feels different than the way I have historically thought about how God wants to engage these parts of me.
It's really powerful. Really, really powerful and really timely. I can see a few faces in my head of women who think that the freedom and the hope are for other people, but not for you in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal this really quick from somebody because it's just been so helpful for me lately. Are you guys familiar with Chuck DeGroat?
Oh, yes.
Have you had him on?
No, I would love to though. I just finished his, oh my gosh, flew through his book, Healing What's Inside, or Healing What's Within, whatever.
Healing What's Within.
Oh, thanks for not sharing it with me.
I literally just Yeah, I know. I literally
It
just
is
finished it. You know, I don't finish
so
books. I don't finish books.
good.
I finished his book. I'll read it again, and I rarely do that. So yeah, it's
Okay, well,
so
can
good.
someone
We
send
were
it to me?
able,
Thanks.
Yes, I will, babe. I will.
we were able to interview him. So maybe I'll connect you. I'll
I
connect
was
you
gonna
guys
say
via
yes,
email.
please.
He is such a wise soul. He's like who I want to be when I get older. He's a therapist, former pastor. His first book, When Narcissism Comes to Church, was like really popular. You can imagine what that book is about. And so, anyways, he has this thing called the Genesis Examen, where he takes the first 3 questions in Genesis. And the way that he talks about this has helped me so much, especially as it relates to my addictive parts. So the first question is when God says to Adam, "Where are you?" And even if we just stopped right there, so many clients come in and they are like, why am I doing this? Why am I stuck? Why do I keep doing this thing I don't want to do? And what Chuck helped me realize is like, that's actually not the wrong question to ask. That's a good question to be able to say, where am I? What am I doing? But I started to notice the tone of the way that people ask themselves
Mm-hmm.
that question, myself included, is filled with criticism, judgment, disappointment. And back to the curiosity piece, if I'm starting there, I'm not actually going to get any answers to the questions,
Yes.
because it's like if I talk to my kid that way, they're gonna like wall up.
Yeah.
So what Chuck's like, what if we can think that God, like we can put that tone onto the way God asked that question too. But what if the way he asked that question is filled with kindness and curiosity and compassion? Because God knows where Adam is, but he's like inviting Adam to reflect on, where am I? And then the second question is, who told you?
Mm.
So the way Chuck talks about it, because he does a lot of attachment work and all that, is like, who either like who actually in your story told you, or who acted in such a way that you then told yourself based off of that experience that like this is the lie that you believe. Because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I believe that I I'll use myself. I believe that one of my lies or wounds is like my voice doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's helpful to be able to say. But I can't just stop there and then remind myself of what's true. Because like God actually wants to bring me into the place of like, who told you your voice doesn't matter? Like,
Yeah.
oh, well, when I had this experience with my dad in the truck, that was incredibly painful. Like he wants to bring me into the particularities of that story, because parts of me still need healing too. And then the third question being, where are you taking your hunger and thirst? And it's like, a lot of places other than where I need to. But being able to start with the where are you? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, Christy, that when you were just saying like you're picturing those faces, for those people to be able to, like for the listener to be able to go, where am I? Really, where am I right now? I usually will start every session I start with, where are you coming in today?
Yeah.
Because like that's a question that I need to ask myself often. And when I can ask myself that question with like inquisitive curiosity and compassion, then I'm actually able to get closer to, well, who told me this is where I am, and where am I going with that? Where do I want to go with that? So that was just something that came to mind as you were imagining the listeners, Christy.
I just wrote about that for our coaching gals and our small group coaching yesterday,
No
about
way.
that, because that was profound. And then when you were talking about it, it was the same thing that was coming to mind for me, because I always imagine that question, where are you, with a finger wagging and a stomping and a mad and
Yeah.
like
Yep.
that kind of. And when I learned that it was an invitation to connection, not condemnation,
Yeah.
through the people who have been the body of Jesus to me, it was
Yeah.
hugely impactful in being able to call out that story.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm imagining the faces of maybe like wives that are listening that are going like, if I ask my husband, where are you in this way? Like he doesn't know. I don't even know where he is. Because he doesn't know where he is. Um, that's exactly why we created 3%.
Yay, tell us.
So we launched this, we're calling it a men's mental health community. It's really a company, like eventually we're going to have retreats and workshops and groups and probably something similar to the way you guys have your thing structured. But what we launched first is a podcast called 3%. And you guys can put links to the podcast and the Substack in the show notes. But my best friend who I met in recovery 8 years ago, we both ended up becoming therapists. And what we realized, like, we're both kind of entrepreneurial and always wanted to do something in addition to our private practices, and realized that what we really have a heart for is helping men connect with themselves more deeply and with God and others. And so we're kind of taking we're trying to take like the best of what we've experienced in 12 step in church, because we both have grown up in church, and he's already been open about it on the show, so it's not a secret, but like he has his own experience of sexual abuse from a youth pastor. So we have like our own complex relationship with church, but also deeply care about helping people foster that relationship still with Jesus, even if they've been harmed by the church. And then our experience as therapists, and like kind of trying to combine those three things to, what we're saying is to create spaces for men, to creating spaces and providing tools to help men develop honesty and vulnerability. So the 3% name comes from this armchair theory that him and I developed, which is at our absolute best, like very best, we are 97% honest with ourselves and others. And it's the 3% of our emotions, behaviors, needs that we keep to ourselves, which keep us stuck in shame and loneliness, from which a lot of other issues stem. And so what we realize is that even in 12-step recovery, which like the foundation of it is vulnerability and making phone calls or talking about what's going on, that even in that process, we could still withhold the details out of fear, and that would keep us stuck. And so we kind of, I don't remember which one of us did, but we came up with like, I think maybe he was like, actually, that's only like 97% of the truth. Like, here's this extra little percent. And I was like, thanks for sharing 3%. And so that just became like a permission slip for us to be like really honest with each other, and to call and be like, hey man, I got to share a 3% with you. And we started using it like with our friends and with our wives, because there's also this like thing that happens when you grow up in church, that we just like don't know how to be honest. And we're like much more concerned about protecting the other person's feelings than being honest. So it became this permission slip to say, hey, I'm going to share something, and it's scary. I really don't want to, but I kind of do because I want to connect with you. I really need you to like listen and try not to judge, because this is actually really hard for me. Like, it kind of communicates all those things once you know what 3% is. So that's where the name comes from. And so right now we have a podcast where we're interviewing leaders in the fields of theology, psychology, the arts, and sports, trying to cover like all the bases for guys, just to like hear what their journey has been like of pursuing a more holistic masculinity is kind of our thing. Because there's lots of, this is not a political comment, this could be true for either side, but there is lots of, can I say, unhealthy images of what a man looks like today. And so we're not like saying, hey, we found the thing that will help you become the man you want to be, but we are saying we found some things that really worked for us and our clients, and we're just creating these spaces for you to come hear your story and our story and learn some tools. And the feedback we've gotten has been really encouraging already. And so that would be a place for those wives listening, of like, maybe a husband like is not at the place where he's willing to say like, I have an addiction, I need to go to 12-step, or I'm ready to go to therapy. Like, maybe that's not where he's at. And if not, that's okay. But he can listen to a podcast, or he can read a newsletter, and he may, for me, what happened was like people were putting language to what I was experiencing, and I didn't know what I was experiencing. But as soon as that language was put to it, it was like, oh yeah, I get that. And I want more of that. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with 3%.
That's so cool. We're gonna have to have you back and
Yes.
both of you back. So good.
Yes, we will be back.
Sounds good.
Bye.
See you next Monday.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrankwine.com, and be sure to follow us over on Instagram, Love Life Sober, and I'm Not Sober, I'm Free. To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites, meethollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com. Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two. And don't forget to subscribe to our pod so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify. This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle find hope and encouragement. Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you, and we'll see you next Monday.